Ukraine says its defenses managed to shoot down 29 out of 30 missiles fired in an overnight countrywide bombardment. Here you see one of those intercepted missiles. This is one that was targeting the capital of Kyiv. Ukraine's military says one civilian was killed by fragments of a missile that was shot down, and 2 other civilians were injured. CNN's Sam Kiley is in southeastern Ukraine for us. So, Sam, Russia has claimed that it struck a Ukrainian arms depot. Is there any truth to that?
There may be. We wouldn't be allowed to report it if it was. I can be honest, we simply don't know. There have been Russian airstrikes that have been successful in attacking logistics nodes of the Ukrainian armed forces in the past. But the Ukrainians insist that only one of those 30 missiles fired at its territory got through. One person was killed in Odessa, we believe, by the descent of wreckage. So there is one missile unaccounted for, and we don't know where it went. But this is part of the Ukrainians' effort to try to make sure that the Russians don't manage to adjust their fire and targeting based on the information that they may get from us or from social network bloggers and others. More widely, I think, Brianna, the really key issue here is the relentless pace of these air attacks. We're now seeing them on a scale that a few months ago we'd see perhaps weekly, perhaps every 10 days. Now we're seeing them on a very significant scale, nearly every night, particularly large numbers of cruise missiles being fired, some 30 last night. Fewer of the Shahed low-level or low-tech drones manufactured in Iran, but all clearly focused on trying to overwhelm, obviously, the air defenses here and soak up the ability of the Ukrainians to defend themselves, I think, ahead of what the Ukrainians are saying is a coming summer offensive. In short, the Russians want to be able to safely get into the air and support their troops when it comes to an increase in the pace and violence of the ground war, which, of course, is continuing, particularly around the city of Bakhmut.
All right, Sam Kiley, live for us in southeastern Ukraine. Thank you for the latest on the war. We appreciate it. Jim?
For the first time, we are learning that Ukraine has fired the long-range Storm Shadow missile successfully at Russian targets. The UK provided the cruise missile ahead of Ukraine's highly anticipated counteroffensive. A short time ago, I spoke with the UK Secretary of State for Defense, Ben Wallace, and here's our conversation beginning with those missiles.
Well, look, we just got informed by the Ukrainians that they had successfully used them. I presume by that it has been successful. I don't know the full details. We obviously, like the other allies, are not involved in such detailed use of our gifting. We just make sure that they are gifted what they request, and we do it within the boundaries of whether it's obviously in accordance to helping Ukraine defend itself and making sure that it's a calibrated response. So all I can confirm is that it has been used successfully. That is the information I received from the Ukrainians, and I'm pleased that it is helping them to defend their country.
Looking ahead, this is, of course, central. This is one of many weapons systems considered central to the highly anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. In your view, does Ukraine have all it needs to order the start of that offensive when they are ready?
It definitely has a significant part of what it needs to start an offensive when the time is judged right by their military commanders and their political leaders. And, you know, the West, the United States, United Kingdom, and the rest of many of the powers in Europe have donated significant amounts. We've also accompanied that with training to make sure that they are not only basically trained, but also trained to a more advanced level to deliver some combined arms. But, you know, it's easy for me to say thousands of miles away and anyone else, you know, everyone should get on with it. It's not going to be me that's fixing a bayonet and walking towards a machine gun and all the difficult tasks that Ukrainian leaders are going to have to task. But I think we are, you know, over a year on, we're in a position where the Ukrainians now have in many areas some advantages over the Russians, and should they seek to try and push them back, you know, it is clear they could be able to do that. But of course, you know, we'll see. War is unpredictable. When I was serving in the armed forces, we used to say no plan survives contact with the enemy. Yeah. We'll see how it goes. But Storm Shadow, just like the US gifting HIMARS, are very, very important components of allowing Ukraine to be successful.
If Ukraine chooses to attempt to take back Russian territory in Crimea, as well as the eastern parts of the country, Would the UK support that if that's their decision to do so?
Look, it's their sovereign soil. It's a bit like you asking me if the US were choosing to take back parts of Texas from an enemy that had invaded it. You wouldn't take anyone else from abroad telling you what you can and can't take back. It is Ukrainian soil. It is their sovereign territory. It has been invaded. They've lost thousands of lives as a result of that invasion. And I think ultimately it'll be Ukraine's decision. Under international law, they have every right to do that in accordance of self-defense. Britain isn't going to stand in the way of that. But I think, we are a long way from that. We're in a position where at the moment the Russians have lost considerable amounts of land that they took in February last year, but they still hold on to significant amounts. And it will be for Ukraine to decide what access, what advance they make and where they do it within their country.
As you know, U.S. officials have publicly warned China from supplying arms to Russia for the war in Ukraine. Has China to date heeded those warnings? Is there any evidence that it has supplied lethal military aid?
Well, I think one of the most disappointing things for Russia throughout this process is that China has hardly been a full-throated supporter of Russia. We've seen in the UN, China has consistently abstained. It hasn't voted in favor. In fact, we saw, I think, recently a vote in another UN body where effectively China went against Russia. And we haven't seen to date any more than words and a bit of support. That could change, and I think that's why the United States issued that warning. That could change. But for now, I think Russia has demonstrated to China that this war was a bad choice by Russia. I think China recognizes that it also has a friendship with Ukraine, that this is bad for business, it's bad for, instability is bad for China, and therefore I don't think it's in China's interest to fuel a disastrous war with more weapons. So I think for now, the person most disappointed by China will be Russia, that for all of the talk, Russia's friend hasn't come to the rescue, and secondly, Ukraine are making advances. The global community has a role to play here in saying to Putin these things are unacceptable, and that includes China and India. We did see that publicly, if you remember last year. Yeah. China and India did say to Putin it would be unacceptable. I haven't seen anything change from their posture, and this is why the international community is so important in messaging to President Putin that his decision was wrong. He's broken international law. He should stop his invasion. He should reverse it, and he doesn't have any friends. I mean, that's the key. You don't find China a full-throated supporter. You don't find, even his Central Asian traditional allies are now criticizing him for it. He's pretty much on his own, and I think when everyone else has left the party, he should reconsider.
I know the UK and a number of others have expressed concern about allies who might pressure Ukraine at some point to give up territory in exchange for a ceasefire. And I personally have heard from Western leaders, particularly in the eastern part of Europe, concern that there are some in Europe who might apply that pressure to Ukraine. Are you aware of any such pressure, and what would the UK's response be if Zelensky or others were told, hinted in some way, listen, you got to make a deal?
Well, I've worked with the Ukrainians on and off for nearly the last 7 years. First of all, the Ukrainians are tough, and pressure will just fall off them in a sense of any one nation rang up and said, we think you should do something, and they don't want to do it, they won't be pressurized. And that's one of the lessons of the last 18 months nearly of the invasion, is that everyone has underestimated their determination. But, I was in Berlin yesterday. I saw a very strong resolve from the German government to stand by Ukraine, to make sure that they can defend themselves and defend not only the same freedoms that you and I enjoy, but also that they should be allowed to enjoy. If you look at the statements from President Macron after President Zelensky's visit, that's getting tougher towards Russia, not a watering down. The direction of travel of the international community is actually stronger than it's ever been. The type of Western systems being gifted is another sign of a strong determination to make sure Russia gets the message that we ain't going anywhere.
Understood. Well, Mr. Minister, thanks so much for taking the time. We appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
The UK has also joined the U.S. in warning about the rising threat from China in Asia. And Boris, I asked the defense minister there if President Biden's cutting short his trip to Asia would send any sort of signal of weakness to China. And he said, in his view, no, that actions speak louder than words out there, particularly the joint U.S.-Australian-UK defense treaty.